People who went from being extremely attracted to someone to being indifferent or repelled, what killed it? And also, Redditors, have you ever gotten an ick from a potential partner or love interest that instantly killed your attraction to them? If so, what happened? Absolutely zero interest or ability to recognize their part in a conflict. Completely unable to take responsibility for their mistakes and turning to emotional abuse to deflect accountability. Well, something finally clicked when he said, "I just need to break you down," off the cuff in passing. I looked shocked and he followed up with, "So I can build you back up." Who in their right mind says things like that to someone they love? I watched my ex film a TikTok about a man in our neighborhood. The neighbor was military and had been in a car accident and the insurance wouldn't be enough to fix his car, so he was trying to get the mangled hood open. He wasn't having much luck, so he started trying to cut directly through the hood via wailing on it with a crowbar. You could tell he was having a shit day and was doing his best to deal. I heard my now ex talking in the kitchen. I get up and walk in and see her in a selfie stance at our kitchen window filming the guy across the way trying to get into his hood. She made some snide comments about being trashy and other real TikTok-level comments. It was like watching someone you love die. The person I had spent years with and thought I loved was nothing more than an empty husk in front of me, tossing her integrity/humanity aside for the views. A fellow human suffering, let me make jokes and try to get famous off it. I did not break up with her at that time, but I did grab a crowbar from my toolbox and went out and joined in the wailing on the hood. I figured if she wants to be famous, she is going to have to share her trashy boyfriend in the video too. My neighbor and I failed to get into the Fort Knox of hoods, but had a good laugh and went back home. "You ruined my video," was the first words out of her mouth. It was that exact moment I knew it was over. I could not look at her without being disgusted. Being ignored for long periods of time. Always being the one initiating conversations. Rarely getting the time of day. All of this shows disinterest, and I hate that he won't just come out and say it. Getting to know them. They were a pretty unhappy and generally mean person inside. Once I saw how they treated others while demanding they be treated much better by everyone, the attraction was gone. I think I'm pregnant. I'm a week late. How can you be pregnant? You told me you were on the pill. I was. But I missed a couple days. Then I missed a couple more. So I just gave up and stopped taking them. Why didn't you tell me? We should have gone back to using condoms. I don't like condoms. And God doesn't give you more than you can handle. I couldn't handle a child right now. So I didn't think God would let me get pregnant. We'd been together for less than 3 months. She got a pregnancy test, it came back negative, and I immediately broke up with her. I saw a guy at a bar once who I swore was the hottest guy I'd ever seen. I told my friend, who told the guy, and he asked for my number. We talked and I told him I worked at a certain bookstore. He then proceeded to come there looking for me. It was closing and I had to shelve some books. In alphabetical order. I was looking for the right letter on the shelves and he laughed and said he didn't know the alphabet. He started trying to say it and kept screwing it up. He didn't know the alphabet. I've never won 80 ed on attraction so hard in my life. Talking about our interests, and after I listened to him blab about his landscaping business, I went to talk about my interests and he interrupted me to say, "Wow, you really have nothing interesting to say, do you?" The amount of time he spent plotting revenge, usually against his parents or ex-wife, should have been spent introspectively and on getting his life back on track. We broke up shortly thereafter. Then we tried to reconcile. Then he smoked meth in front of me. And that was the end of that. My ex always wanted to do Airbnb getaways, but she would always suggest places that are literally mansions, and she expected me to pay for it myself. I argued against some of these places because they were too damn expensive, and she mentioned that her exes made almost as much as me and they would book these Airbnbs no problem. I never told her at this point how much I made, and that turned me off her completely with that statement. Had a guy once whose car smelled so bad I had to try not to throw up while sticking my head out the window. He couldn't smell it. I thought I was going to die. Turns out he forgot about a double cheeseburger in the back of his car for over 2 weeks in the hot sun. I don't know what bothered me more. The smell or the fact that it didn't bother him. Literally every single problem she had was someone else's fault. Even when there was proof it was her fault, she would argue non-stop that it was someone else's. She got in a car wreck and called insurance over and over again to tell them that it was the other person's fault. They checked the computer in her car because it saved her speed she was going right before the wreck. It told them everything they needed to know and she still denied it. I met a woman on Tinder a few years back and we hit it off really well. About a week after we had met, she deleted me and blocked me on all forms of social media with little to no explanation. I was texting her on my iPhone and after she sent one last text, it went from iMessage blue to regular text green. After that, I messaged her again a few hours later and heard nothing. I checked my Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram and couldn't find her anywhere. I panicked because I thought I had genuinely connected with her, but after a day or two I calmed down and thought, if this is some kind of a test, I am out. Fuck this high school bullshit. So I fired up Bumble and Tinder again, and matched with someone on Bumble who showed genuine interest in me and started an awesome conversation. The next morning, I got a text from the original woman, and she literally said, "I see you're back on Tinder. I made a fake account to see if you would get back on, and sure enough, there you are." I laughed to myself because I knew immediately I had dodged a massive bullet. I responded essentially saying, "Well, you blocked me on all social media and my number. How was I supposed to know you'd reach out?" She literally said, "It was supposed to be a test of your loyalty, and you failed. I can never be with someone who would start talking to other women immediately after something so trivial." I responded saying, "All right, sounds good. Have a good one." Then blocked her myself. Oh, and the woman I began talking to on Bumble immediately after the first one blocked me? We will be celebrating 3 years of marriage, and 5 years total together this upcoming September. I went from a batshit crazy woman to the most wonderful person I've ever met in my life. Talk about an upgrade. Found out the reason he rented the house next door to his parents was so his mom would make his meals, wash his clothes, etc. Had the audacity to say, "Let me call my mom," when I mentioned I was a little hungry. At first I was interested in her because she seemed really cool and funny, but then it became apparent that literally everything out of her mouth was, "Look cool and funny." It was impossible to have a real conversation, even a casual one. Instead it was constant Arrested Development lines and sarcasm. She replaced the word dollars with doll hairs, which I chuckled at the first time, but she said it every time, like she was trying to earn Reddit karma in real-life conversations. Drove me nuts. In college I was seeing a girl who lived in student residence with me, but on another floor. She would always talk about how another guy, Tom, on her floor was obsessed with her and would show me texts between them. She said she only talked to him because he's harmless and that they're friends. I never met him. After a week, her ex-friend from high school pulled me aside and told me not to trust her. She said that the girl I was seeing is a notorious liar and that Tom doesn't exist. That she added her own number in her phone as Tom, would text herself, and then delete the sent messages. The only reason her ex-friend knew is because she saw the text message exchange happen in the reflection of a mirror when they were in the same room. I was close with front desk and asked if they could look up the names from that floor. They said yes, and told me that there was no guy named Tom on her floor. I noped out of that real quick. First red flag, he wanted me to drive because he had an interlock. Second, he talked about biting the ear off his ex's new boyfriend. Third was the jugs of urine scattered in his living room. There was no second date. My brief GF bought me some hair care products before she came over because it was right by her house. In return, I said I would go grocery shopping and make her a nice dinner. I thought this to be an even exchange. That night I found her looking through my trash for the receipt for the groceries to make sure that the $30 she spent on me was equal to the amount I spent on her dinner. Dated a guy who seemed chill but kept talking about social media and how people/exes were scheming against him. I believed him at first until it got to a point where he thought things like a photo someone put up was an indicator that they were getting him back, when these people were literally just doing normal things and posting normal stuff. I think he was schizophrenic, but it was really unsettling. Months later he rang me out of the blue to ask me about a link between his ex, myself and a friend. The link was butterflies, and because of this link he thought we were conspiring against him. Making assumptions about me on the first day, I suppose someone like you. Or, a girl like you wouldn't understand. I am literally right here, ask me. Don't tell me what my life is, or is like. Anyway, eventually I got up and left. They messaged me what my problem is, so I wrote back something to the effect of, "A boy like you wouldn't understand even if I told you." She started to set up the relationship in a way that made me her emotional punching bag, to where I was to blame for any bad feelings she had. Nothing I could do or say in those moments could ever help the situation, because that wasn't my purpose in her life. I was the distraction from her own issues she refused to acknowledge. Her extreme moods weren't because of her, or her past, but it was because I said something the wrong way, or laid on the clean sheets with a sweaty body. The ick came about when I realized, at 40 years old, that this has always been the pattern in my relationships with women, and it has everything to do with how my mom treated me. She had her own massive trauma from being horribly abused as a child, but used that as a shield to use me as her emotional and physical punching bag when she was in a bad mood. "You're not being abused, I was abused," was a line I heard constantly as she beat me on a regular basis. Once I saw that for what it was, it disgusted me, but it also changed how I handle relationships now, and now I'm happily married for 2 years to a wonderful woman who never does that to me. Went on a date with a guy I met at a party. He made me prove that I liked Lord of the Rings by answering who said what when he quoted someone. He pulled out a notebook of really poorly drawn anime characters and asked me if he could draw me. He was a lot shorter than me and asked if it bothered me. I said no, then he said, "Good, I like Amazonian goddesses." He kept trying to put his jewelry onto me despite my protests. He asked what I wanted to order for food, then ignored me and ordered me something else and got frustrated I didn't eat it all. He referenced being arrested, made me guess what for, and when I refused to guess for not knowing him well enough he said GBH. He was a trainee doctor and asked if I'd ever broken any bones. When I replied yes, he said that he was going to look up my x-rays. And the icing on the cake. When I wanted to leave he got my knee-high boots, slipped them onto my feet and zipped them up and said, "You should always be treated like a goddess." My Morticia Addams. All one date. She started trauma dumping on me, and after telling her multiple times that I wasn't comfortable talking about this in an extremely public place with kids around, she just kept going. She went into extreme detail too, showing me pictures and stuff. When I mentioned getting therapy she said that she didn't want to change. Hard pass. Funk house. Stepped into a smell that, I can't describe it. George Clinton would complain about it. Then, as I was sitting on the couch, noticed gnats everywhere. Looked over at a window and there were thousands living and dead in the sill. Tried to throw away a soda bottle, hundreds more swarmed up from the pile of dirty dishes in the sink. That was enough for me. Yeah, I went on a date with a girl who seemed perfectly fine. She was really nice and made interesting conversation, clearly cared and put effort in the date. But then halfway through she gets a call on her Bluetooth headset, which I hadn't even noticed beneath her hair. Why, but it turned me off so quick. It was a coworker calling too, and she started discussing some clearly stressful topic, planning a meeting or something. They got to near arguing and she kept rolling her eyes and sort of half winking at me every time the coworker said something that annoyed her. She ended up saying she had just seen a car crash and she had to run, which weirdly got me back into her a bit since that's a slick move, but then immediately called another coworker to complain about the first one. And kept winking at me. This was all on a Saturday morning BTW. One of the weirdest dates I've ever been on. When I was in my senior year of high school, the son of one of my mom's work friends who was my age, was into me. I wasn't as into him, but he seemed nice enough, and I went out on a single date with him. The reason there was no second date? He kept trying to find out if I was still a virgin or not. His reasoning was that if I wasn't, then it wouldn't matter if we fucked on the first date, and if I was, he would work for it. I didn't tell him one way or another because it was none of his goddamned business, and his reasoning was utterly pathetic. Never spoke to him again after I called a cab and went home. I went on a date with a seemingly nice guy in my early 20s. It went well, so after dinner, we cuddled in the back seat of his car in a quiet country area listening to music. He gently played with my hand and fingers and gave me a little massage, so relaxing. When he got to my wrist he looked at it, flipped it around a few times, and says in a lustful voice, "It would be so easy for me to break this little thing right now." Edit, I said this in response to someone below, for you guys asking about what happened after. It was maybe 2007? I don't remember in detail what happened next. I kind of just played it off like, you're so strong, until he took me home. Kind of tried to de-escalate, so didn't acknowledge that statement too much. Just kept the conversation moving to something else and was careful to not embarrass or upset him. I didn't keep seeing him. I was busy for the next dates he asked me on, and then acted as boring as possible until he lost interest in me eventually. We went to college together and were in ROTC together, so avoiding was kinda hard. He started a relationship with someone else pretty quickly after that. I was on a date with a dude and we were double dating with my best friend and her BF. I had to work that night at 11. So around 10 I mentioned I needed to be taken back to my car. He acted all cute trying to get me to call in and continue the date, and finally I was like, "Seriously, please, I have to get going." Then he got a little mad and said, "Why? You're just a waitress." That has stuck with me ever since. I'm not just anything, and neither were the people at my job waiting for me to arrive so they could go home. Went on a date with an outwardly normal girl. We started kissing and getting frisky back at her place, and she started meowing and acting cat-like. It was little mules at first, then leading on to her stopping, licking her fingertips and grooming her ears. She saw me make a face and questioned why I'd made a face. I was straight up and said, "Because you're pretending to be a cat." She said, "Oh, was I? Sometimes it takes over when I'm horny." We tried again, she mewled again, and I noped out of there pretty quickly after that. Dated this girl for a short while, a month or so, and I visited her home once while her family was out of town. It was just a mess and smelled bad because she had a lot of pets, birds, cats, a micro pig, and some very neglected dogs. The doggies were matted up, smelly and seeking love and attention. I inquired about the dogs and she said, they're not mine." When I said goodnight later from the car, she leaned in to kiss me. I just didn't feel connected anymore. I called her later and asked her more about the dogs. They were her father's and he was never around. Her sisters and her didn't care for them, so after a couple nights I stole the dogs and took them to a rescue shelter. They're currently with a new loving home and the girl's family never even flinched at the dogs not being there anymore. I broke it off a few weeks later once I knew they were blissfully ignorant to their dogs being gone. She was a sweet girl and liked me a lot. Loads of affection. But I couldn't be with someone who could just ignore some innocent lives that way. Critics. Overconfidence. Had one guy who I was on a first date with, he was nice enough at first. But then he started bragging that I should be happy that he chose to drive 1 hour to see me, and that he had other chicks he could have seen instead. He was overly confident that I was in love with him. I noped out so fast. Dude was in the bathroom for a while clearly taking a shit. No big. He lived in a weird little apartment where the only sink was in the kitchen. He comes out and doesn't immediately go to wash his hands. I ask him about it. It starts a small argument where he then refuses to wash his hands because he was going to, but then I made him feel like a child, so now he has to make a point. All attraction lost in that very second. So fucking gross. Can't believe I let poop hands touch me. Wanna vomit so bad. Hygiene is important, folks. And the little things indicate how you go about the big things. If you're still here, can you please check if you are already subscribed? It would help out a ton. Thanks for watching. Until next time.